Today in Spider-Man, we get some weird blue ramp, an upgraded Gonti, a Mayhem land, and of course, a ton of spider support. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Spider-Man spoilers. So we're about halfway through Spider-Man spoiler season. We get the full set on Friday, and today we have a ton of cards to talk about, a bunch of mythics, a ton of really spicy stuff, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking interesting new Spider-Man cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag up from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Spider-Man. So first up today, we get a new Spider-Man. Imagine that, in Cosmic Spider-Man. So Cosmic Spider-Man, a 5-color, 5-mana, 5/5 legendary spider human hero. It has flying, first strike, trample, lifelink, and haste. In the beginning combat on your turn, it gives your other spiders flying, first strike, trample, lifelink, and haste. So Cosmic Spider-Man, it reminds me kind of Odric, I guess, for spiders, where just you give all of your creatures, assuming you're a spider deck, which if you're playing this card, you're going to be a spider deck, but it just gives all your creatures a huge amount of abilities, and they are pretty strong abilities. The combination of haste, evasion, and lifelink means that if you just build a big board and play this card, you're going to get a massive life swing. You're going to hit your opponents for a ton of damage. You're going to gain a ton of life. Also kind of reminds me of Chromatic Core. It's just like a 5-color, 5-drop that has a ton of keywords on it. So I think this card has literally one purpose, which is to be the commander of a deck that wants to play all the Spider-Man. If you just want to take all the different versions of Spider-Man, put them all together and play a game of Commander, Cosmic Spider-Man, it's your commander for the deck. I guess you could do it with non-Spider-Man spiders if you wanted to, like Ishkana style spiders, but I think that's why this card is made. It is literally just the 5-color, I want to play all the Spider-Man commander. The other place I could see this card seeing playing commander is in the Dragon Changeling deck, the tribal deck, where you just play all the changelings and then you play these different payoffs for different creature types to power up the changelings. This seems like a really strong payoff. Just giving all of your changelings lifelink, haste, first strike, trample, and flying is really, really good. So I think it's really good there as well. In 60 card formats, we can obviously build like 5-color spider against the odds in standard, but I think the most spiky purpose of this card is probably Soul Flayer decks. If you can exile this to Soul Flayer, if you give a whole bunch of keywords, same with Urborg Scavengers. So it might have some sort of home there where you're just trying to mill this over and eat it from your graveyard. Otherwise, like I said, it would be fun to build 5-color Cosmic Spider-Man spiders in standard, but I would be very surprised if that was a deck. I think there could definitely be a spider deck in standard, but I'd be surprised if it was 5 colors and playing Cosmic Spider-Man. That seems more like a commander thing to me. We also got the Spider-Verse. Speaking of 5 mana, it's a 5-mana red mythic enchantment that says the legend rule doesn't apply to spiders you control. And then whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you can copy it. If you do, choose a new target for the copy. If the copy is a permanent, it gains haste, but only do it once per turn. So Spider-Verse, very interesting card. The once per turn restriction does mean you can't just fully pop off. If this just copied every spell that you cast from anywhere but your hand, oh my god, would that be a broken card. But still, a nice piece of value. And then the legend rule not applying to spiders, that's probably not going to matter to most decks that play this card, but I guess it can matter in a spider deck where this is your mirror gallery if you want to stack up multiple versions of the same Spider-Man. But I think that last mode is really the most interesting mode of the card. So I was struggling to figure out where it really fit with Spider-Man in specific, but I guess Spider-Man 2099, Ghost Spider, they care about casting stuff from exile. So in that deck, you can play your Ghost Spider, Spider-Man 99, Impulse Draw, or flash things back from the graveyard, have your Spider-Verse to get double the copies of it. So it does seem good there. Although I think it might be even better just in generic shells. There's a lot of ways, even in standard, that we can cast cards from anywhere but our hand. Like Warp lets us cast cards from exile. Plot lets us cast cards from exile. In other formats, we get cards like Snapcaster, flashback cards that let us cast spells from our graveyard. And just getting an extra copy of the first spell that we cast from our non-hand place each turn actually seems like a pretty powerful ability. Of course, this is probably going to be more of a commander thing or an against the odds thing than like a truly competitive thing. But still, like Quantum Riddler ×2, Outcaster Trailblazer ×2, that is a lot of value once it gets going. going. In Commander, outside of Spider shenanigans, this seems like another good and Prosper card. If you're playing an Impulse Draw style Commander, a Prosper, a Rocco, a Feldorn, this is just a lot of value. And remember, it triggers on your first spell each turn. So if you can find a way to cast a spell from exile or your graveyard during your opponent's turn, you can get even more value out of it. But I think good and Prosper, most common way to play this card. There's also a couple of commanders that specifically care about casting stuff from anywhere but your hand. Mizzix's Replica Rider, the 12th Doctor, Iraxa. These aren't super popular commanders, but if you're playing any of those and they're your pet deck, Spider-Verse is going to fit right in there because your whole point is to cast things from places that are not your hand. So Spider-Verse is just going to power up those decks quite a bit. So Spider-Verse, I think the card's fun. I like Panharmonicon effects. In some ways, this is Panharmonicon for casting things from anywhere but your hand. And I think it's a pretty fun card. At 5 mana, it's probably a bit too slow for standard. Like, you gotta play this, you presumably have to untap the next turn, and then cast something to get value out of it. So it's probably gonna be too slow for competitive standard. But in a commander deck, or in an against the odds deck, the card seems like he can do some pretty powerful things. We also got Black Cat Cunning Thief, a 5 mana 2/3 legendary human rogue villain. It says when it enters, look at the top 9 cards of target opponent's library, exile 2 of them face down, put the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order, and you may play the exiled cards for as long as they remain exiled. Mana of any type can be spent to cast spells this way. So Black Cat is essentially all grown up Gonti. It's 2025 Gonti. It's Gonti, except you dig 9 cards deep and get 2 cards rather than 4 cards deep and getting 1 card. Although Black Cat, I guess, is more mana than Gonti, but essentially it does what Gonti does, but even better. The reason I'm excited about this card is this is the perfect way to stop Tomer from ever assembling Calderon Commander Clash. That's my favorite part about these cards. If you play Commander and you got someone like Tomer who's just trying to get all the Calder pieces, if you Black Cat and steal one of the Calder pieces, they're exiled face down. So not only can Tomer never assemble Caldra, he doesn't even know that he can never assemble Caldra. So he's still going to be drawing cards and trying to find his Calder pieces. Why we know that Black Cat made that totally impossible. But really, I like Gonti effects. I think they're just fun effects in Commander, being able to steal your opponent's cards. So you can definitely play Black Cat just like Gonti as your commander, as just like an upgraded Gonti. Or you can play it in the 99 of other theft decks like Don Andreas, Gonti Canny Inquisitor, maybe Sen Triplets, and it's going to be really good there as well. So Black Cat, at 5 mana, probably not a standard staple, although, I mean, 5 mana ETB, draw 2, you can blink it. I don't know. I'm probably going to try it in standard, even though I don't expect it to be great. We can definitely be able to steal all of your opponent's stuff deck in standard, which is going to be super fun. But mostly, I think it feels like an upgraded Gonti that should at least be really fun in Commander. We get one of the more interesting designs from the set so far in Hydro-Man Fluid Felon. So Hydro-Man, a double blue 2 mana 2/2 legendary elemental villain. It says whenever you cast a blue spell, if it's a creature, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So essentially prowess for blue spells. And then the important ability, at the beginning of your end step, you untap it, and until your next turn, it becomes a land that gains tap to add a blue mana. So Hydro-Man, it's essentially a hard to cast Grizzly Bears with prowess for blue spells during your turn, but then during your opponent's turn, it turns into an island, or a pseudo island. It doesn't actually have the type, but it taps for blue, so it's essentially an island, which kind of makes it a blue mana dork, which is something that is super rare in Magic. Blue doesn't typically get mana dorks, but for it to be a mana dork, you gotta have a way to cast spells at instant speed during your opponent's turn. So in standard, I imagine you play this, you hopefully cast a couple spells, pump it, get in for some damage, and then on your end step, it's going to flip into this pseudo island, and then you have Spell Pierce up during your opponent's turn. You have your Null up if your opponent casts an Agatha's Soul Cauldron. If you get a bit of extra mana, you can flash in a Flood Pits Drowner. So I think in some sort of like control shell or flash shell, this card might actually be very, very powerful. The other upside of being a land during your opponent's turn is it means this naturally dodges sorcery speed removal. So if your opponent's going to Ultima or Deadly Cover Up or Pyroclasm, your Hydro-Man's going to be a land, so it's not going to die. The only downside is, if you play this in a control shell, you might be the one that wants to cast the Ultima or the Deadly Cover-Up, and then you're going to blow up your own Hydro-Man because it's going to be a creature during your turn. But still, it is nice that if your opponent wants to kill this, they're going to need to have some sort of instant speed interaction. So where do we actually play this card? And I think the answer is some sort of like control shell, maybe a flash shell. We've had like mono blue flash decks in the past, maybe something like that reemerges. challenges, but something where you can play at instant speed. I guess you could consider playing it in just like stock Demir or something. Although in that context, I'm not sure it beats out Azure Beastbinder, Flood Pit Strouder, but it works really well with Flood Pit Strouder. But I think those are the shells you're looking for, is stuff that can cast spells during your opponent's turn. As far as Commander is concerned, this card is very intriguing. I think there's some argument that this is actually like the blue rampant growth in a weird way. It gets around the biggest problem with Mana Dorks, at least the biggest problem I have with Mana Dorks in Commander, and the reason I don't really play Mana Dorks, which is they just get blown up by the first Wrath, right? If you just spew a bunch of Mana Dorks, someone casts a Wrath, you lose all your mana. But Hydro Man kind of gets around that, because during your opponent's turn, when people are theoretically going to be wrathing, it's just going to be a land. So I think this could just be like a generically good ramp card for blue decks, because blue struggles with ramp so much, but it's going to get even better in some sort of flash style deck, right? Blue naturally plays a lot of instant speed. You have instant speed card draw, you got counter spells, but if you're playing like Malcolm or some other flash commander, then Hydro Man becomes even better in your deck. The other thing I want to mention about this card, because I saw some confusion about it, it does work through Blood Moon. So I'm not going to get into all the technicalities here, but essentially because of how layers work, if there's a Hydro Man and a Blood Moon, your Hydro Man will still turn into a land on your end step. It'll tap for red instead of blue because it'll be a non-basic, so it'll actually be a mountain. But then, when it goes back to your turn, Hydro Man will still turn back into a creature because of which layers the effects apply at. So all this to say, it doesn't really matter why it happens, but if there's a Blood Moon on the battlefield, Hydro Man still gonna do its thing. It'll just make red mana instead of blue mana. So Hydro Man, I really love this card. It's just such a unique design. We haven't really seen anything like this before. I'm still not sure how good it'll be in 60 card formats. I'm very excited to try it in Commander as just a generic ramp spell in mono blue decks. In 60 card formats, I think it could be good enough in some sort of flash shell, in some sort of control shell, but it's just so unique that it's actually kind of hard to figure out. We also got a new Wrath in Villainous Wrath. So Villainous Wrath, 5 mana black sorcery, target opponent loses life equal to the number of creatures they control, and then you destroy all creatures. So Villainous Wrath, as far as Standard's concerned, I think it's Wrath number 2 behind Deadly Cover-Up. I think in Standard, being able to exile all copies of like a VV or something is just better than dealing some damage to your opponent. Although it really depends on the meta. Right now we're in a meta where like answering one specific thing is really important, but if the meta shifts and we end up in a world where going wide with something like Arabella, or think of those old Convoke decks and people are spewing tons of creatures on the battlefield, then Villainous Wrath might actually even be better than Deadly Cover-Up in Standard. A Wrath that deals 5 damage or something at your opponents is actually very, very scary for just 5 mana. So I think the card's very good. I just think it's probably doesn't line up with the meta quite as well as Deadly Cover-Up at the moment. But like I said, the card's going to be legal for a million years. It'll probably be a really good option in the future. As far as Commander's concerned, one of the weird things about mono black decks in Commander is even though black is thought of as being one of, if not the best removal color, its wraths are actually kind of mid. Like, Damnation's really good, Toxic Deluge is really good, but once you get past those two wraths, you have really expensive stuff like Kindred Dominance, Decree of Pain, and Garrick's Wake. Crux of Fate, if your Dragon deck is great, otherwise it's pretty medium. I guess the other one that I didn't show is Blasphemous Edict, which isn't technically a wrath, but works like a wrath. But I think that Villainous Wrath is probably like Wrath number 3 or 4 in black. I think it's behind Damnation, behind Toxic Deluge, maybe behind Blasphemous Edict, but I think it's in that next group of wraths, and I think it'll see a lot of play in Commander, because in Commander, it is not uncommon to have someone that's playing the token deck, they're popping off, they got 20 creatures on the battlefield, and this is the scariest wrath in Magic if you're the token player, because this can be a wrath that not just blows up your board, but it can be killing you on the spot, it can be throwing 20 damage at your face. The dream is your opponent like makes infinite creatures, but they can't give them haste, and then you untap in Villainous Wealth and just infinite damage your opponent. That's the kind of stuff that Villainous Wrath can do that none of those other wraths can do. So I think in Commander, I would play this in a lot of black decks, and it lines up really well with what black wants to do in Commander anyway, which is kind of drain your opponent out of the game. So even if the Villainous Wrath damage, or loss of life technically, is not enough to kill your opponent, when you consider that black decks have Gray Merchants and Exsanguinates and Torment of Hailfires, even if you hit your opponent for 10 with Villainous Wrath, you can probably use some of these other cards to finish your opponent off. So Villainous Wrath, The card seems really good. I think it is standard playable, but like I said, I would rather play Deadly Cover Up right now, but that could change in the future. And in Commander, I think this is not as good as the very best Black Ras, Tactic Delusion Damnation, but it's in the next tier, and I think being in that next tier is still more than enough for this card to see a ton of play. And if you have a token player in your local meta, in your pod, in your play group, then this card is just a hilarious way to get him. Speaking of black cards, we also got The Death of Gwen Stacy, a new saga. So this is a 3-mana black saga. First lore counter, destroy target creature. Second lore counter, each player, so including you, may discard a card. Each player doesn't loses 3 life. And then lore counter number 3, exile any number of target players' graveyard. So The Death of Gwen Stacy, this card is interesting to me. If you think about what this is, it's a murder, essentially, a 3-mana sorcery speed destroy a creature effect, which isn't great. Like, murder is not exactly a playable card, but then you get a couple of additional effects on top of that. You get like a one-shot Torment of Hailfire. It is awkward that it affects you as well, although maybe you're playing like Mayhem or something and can take advantage of discarding a card. This is 3 mana, and then Zombifies 4 mana, so the lore counter number 2, if you play this on turn 3, would line up with being able to discard your reanimation target and then put it into play with your Zombify or whatever, so there could be some upside there. And then essentially get a Tormod script with your last lore counter. So just how good is this card? It reminds me a lot of like Awaken the Honor Dead, another 3-mana saga that can blow something up. It reminds me a little bit of Archenemy's Charm. It's a 3-mana black removal spell with a bunch of different options on it. I think that this card could see standard play. I do not think this is like a 4 of staple removal spell, but if you look at black decks right now, their removal package is kind of in chaos since rotation. If you look at like black decks or Dimir decks, they're typically playing like a couple of Tragic Trajectories, a couple of Bitter Triumphs, a couple of Shoot the Sheriffs, a couple of Long Goodbyes, maybe an Archenemy's Charm. I think that The Death of Gwen Stacy fits into this package. I don't think it's the new 4 of, the new best removal spell in the format, but I do think it could definitely be like a 1 of or a 2 of. The value of being able to blow something up and then deal with the graveyards is relevant. We have Reanimator decks, we got Soul Calder decks, so getting that free Tormod script, it is a big upside, although it's not going to be happening until at least turn 5 or whatever, so it's not like your answer to VV Cauldron or something. But I think this card is a solid piece of the black removal sweep, probably a 1 of or 2 of, but not like busted or anything. The biggest thing this has going against it, and the reason I don't think it's a 4 of, is being instant speed is actually really important with your removal right now. When you think of hasty threats like Nova Hellkite, Tursa Light Shatter, with a bunch of Propsydetic memory counters, even just VV popping off, there's a lot of threats in Standard that you really need to be able to kill at instant speed, and the Death of Gwen Stacy just doesn't line up super well with those threats. So that's why I think it's a piece of the black removal package, rather than like the new best black removal spell. But still, I think the card definitely a solid option and should see a bit of standard play. Next up, we get a pretty interesting Gruul Spider-Man in Scarlet Spider Ben Riley. So it's a 3-mana 4/3 with web slinging of 2, so you can cast it for 2 mana if you also return a tapped creature you control to its owner's hand. It has trample, and if you cast it using web slinging, it enters with X+1/+1 counters on it, where X is the mana value of the return creature. So Scarlet Spider Ben Riley, playing this card fairly, not that exciting. I mean, a 3-mana 4/3 trampler isn't bad, but it's also not great. But this card, in the right deck, I think could actually be a very powerful standard card with Llanowar Elves. So I think the most explosive thing you do with this card is turn 1 you Llanowar Elves, turn 2 you tap the Llanowar Elves, you pick it up to Scarlet Spider, you play the Scarlet Spider, it gets an extra counter, so it's essentially a 2-mana 5/4 trampler, and then you even have an extra mana left over that you can just replay the Llanowar Elves, so you still have the Llanowar Elves too. That is a very far above the curve threat. When this is a 2-mana 5/4 trampler, that is big enough to be standard playable. Essentially, you're getting like a better Steel Leaf Champion for even less mana. The only problem with this plan is, in Standard, we only have 1 Llanowar Elf, so the consistency might be an issue. You're not going to get this draw every single game, just because we don't have a backup 1-mana Mana Dork, but that's still the kind of shell where I think this card could be really good. It also seems like it could be good in just like a straight-up Web-Slinger deck. If you're built around web-slinging, and you're playing Spider-Man Web-Slinger, and Spider-Man India, and Spider-Man UK, then this card is going to be even better. Like, you're consistently going to be able to cheat it on the battlefield on the cheap, and you're going going to be built around having creatures that you can get tapped to web sling your stuff into play. So I think this card could definitely be standard playable. It could also just be good as a way to pick up stuff that you kind of want to pick up already. We see Dimir be really good at this with Kaido. One of the upsides of ninjutsuing Kaido into play, it's not just that you get a cheap Kaido, but you also get to pick up something with an ETB, a Spyglass Siren that you want to recast, a Deep Cavern Bat that you want to reset. So I think Scarlet Spider can do something similar. You pick up a Sinnoh Scout and you get to explore again, a Fear of Missing Out, you get to loot again, an Izaqueth, and you get to fight again. So I think those are some of the synergies we're looking for with this card. So Scarlet Spider Ben Riley, not very interested in it for Commander, but I think in Standard, in some sort of web-slinging rule aggro deck, the card could actually be really powerful. We'll just have to wait and see because, like, green Stompy decks still haven't been that good in Standard, but maybe web-slinging and Scarlet Spider will be the card to help change that. We also got a new web-slinging counter spell in Spider Sense, which is definitely tingling. Sorry, I couldn't resist. It's a 2-mana instant with web slinging of a single blue mana. They counters target instant spell, sorcery spell, or triggered ability. So Spider Sense reminds me of Flusterstorm, Miscast, Swan Song, these cheap counters that only deal with instants and sorceries. I guess you get the upside of hitting a triggered ability as well, but I think Spider Sense could actually be pretty good. We were just talking about how Dimir gets a lot of value out of ninjutsuing Kaido, not just because you get Kaido on the cheap, but because you get to reuse your ETB triggers of Spyglass Siren, Flood Pit Runner, Deep Cavern Bat, Tishana's Tidebinder. Spider Sense kind of offers that same ability, right? Like, not only can you use this to counter something, but if you're picking up something with the ETB, you're able to reuse that ETB trigger. Another place it could be good in Standard is maybe out of the sideboard of like Esper Self-Bounce, where yes, you can't directly pick up a Nowhere to Run or a Momentum Break, but you can pick up a Nurturing Pixie or a Sun Petal Curin, which then you can recast to pick up the Momentum Break or the Nowhere to Run, that then you recast to kill another one of your opponent's things. So it kind of plays in that loopy, bouncy value train that you get out of the Esper Self-Bounce decks. So I think this card could be a really good sideboard card in Standard. In older formats, works really well with ninjutsu stuff. If you're ninjutsuing, you're kind of already doing the web slimming thing, so this could be a way to protect your ninjas from your opponent's removal. In Commander, people love playing Swan Song. And I'm not a big Swan Song believer, but I'm actually kind of hyped for Spider Sense, even though it's a narrow counter spell, just because I love reusing Mull Drifters. If you're playing like a Panharmonicon deck, this counters your opponent's removal spell or wrath, lets you pick up your Mull Drifter, recast it to draw more cards, works really well in like Eureka, any sort of ninja deck. So I think this card seems like a decent card for Commander, especially in decks where you can take advantage of bouncing one of your own creatures back to your hand, and a good sideboard card in Standard. Although I will say in Standard, there is one issue I have with this card, which is compared to Negate, which seems like the most obvious competition, Spider Sense misses a lot of really important non-creature permanents. The difference between countering any non-creature and countering it instant and sorcery means that Spider Sense can't get Agatha Soul Cauldron or Prophydetic Memory or a Rest in Peace or a Planeswalker like Chandra or Kaido, which I think might mean that Negate is still just, in a generic sense, in a vacuum, a better sideboard option in Standard. But if you're one of those decks that can get value out of picking up one of your own creatures, then I think the equation might change a little bit. The countering a triggered ability mode, it's okay. Like, you'll randomly get some value out of it, where your opponent, I don't know, like Solemn Simulacrums, and you stifle them getting a land or something. It does not hit activated abilities, so you can't stifle a fetch land. If this also hit activated abilities, oh my god, would this card be so good. But only hitting triggered abilities, I think that's more of like a fringe upside that every once in a while is going to matter, although it's not going to come up a ton. So Spider Sense, I really like the design of this card. I love ninjutsu. I love the web slinging mechanic. I think this is a very powerful counter spell. We'll just have to wait and see how it lines up with the meta. We also got a new Dimir Spider-Man in Superior Spider-Man. So Superior Spider-Man, 4-mana Dimir 4/4. It's a legendary spider-human hero, and it says you may have it enter as a copy of any creature in a graveyard, except his name is Superior Spider-Man, and it's a 4/4 spider-human hero in addition to its other types. When you do, you exile that card from the graveyard. So Superior Spider-Man, it's kind of like a spark double, kind of like a body double. It essentially just clones something from the graveyard, although keeping its same name does mean it can get around the legend rule in some situations. The biggest issue with this card is the one place that Body Double is seen play, the clone from the graveyard effect, is in combos, but all those combos involve copying the same thing again and again and again from your graveyard, where you like Body Double a Karmic Guide and sacrifice it to Viserys and copy it again and just keep looping for infinite triggers. That doesn't work with Superior Spider-Man because you gotta exile the card from the graveyard. So this seems like a fair version of Body Double. It's like Body Double with no combo potential. It is cute that it gets around the legend rule. You can get multiple VVs on the battlefield. Let's say if you already have one and then you play Superior Spider-Man, exiling one from the graveyard, the new VV that you make is actually going to be named Superior Spider-Man, and that's what the legend rule actually cares about, is having two legends with the same exact name. So keeping its name does kind of let you get around the legend rule, which is cute. As far as Commander is concerned, it seems good in Garuda decks. That's the most obvious home. It's just another even mana value clone for the Garuda loop, where you want to mill a clone to copy Garuda and keep it going. So it seems like a Garuda staple. Otherwise, as a commander, it kind of just seems like less interesting and less color the mimeoplasm. So I guess if you just really love Superior Spider-Man the character, go for it. But it doesn't really excite me that much as a commander. So Superior Spider-Man, meh. It's a clone from the graveyard. It's fine. I don't think it has super big implications for any format, but if you want to copy something and have it still be a Spider-Man, it does get the job done. We also got Lady Octopus Inspired Inventor. So this is a 1-mana 0/2 legendary human scientist villain. It says whenever you draw your first or second card each turn, put an ingenuity counter on it, and then tap it, and you can cast an artifact spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to the number of ingenuity counters on it without paying its mana cost. So Lady Octopus, it's like an ether vial, essentially, for artifacts, except it's on a creature, which is a pretty huge downside because creatures tend to die a lot easier than artifacts. It also reminds me a lot of Joyra Ageless Inventor, this 2-mana 2/3 that you tap in and gets 2 ingenuity counters on it. Then you put an artifact with mana value X or less from your hand on the battlefield, where X is the number of counters on it. Ether vial, obviously a great card. Joyra didn't really do anything, and I think that might be the fate of Lady Octopus. So you can see what this card could do. If you play this card, you have it sit on the battlefield. As you draw cards, it starts building up counters. Then you tap in and you play a free candy trail. Then you tap in and play a Chirogen Relic, which draws you a card. It gives you another counter on Lady Octopus. Eventually you got a ton of counters. And you play an Endstone for free. And it's really cool. So the ceiling's high. Like, if you can drop this on turn 1 in specific, and your opponent just never kills it, it is a 1-drop that can take over the game. On the other hand, your opponent's probably going to kill it if it actually starts to get scary, and it's really bad off the top in the late game. If you top deck this on turn 5 or something, it's got no counters, you got to play this 0/2, you got to wait for it to build up, and then you can cast like a 1-drop for free. It's just going to be way too slow. So I think this card is actually kind of a trap card. I would be surprised if this card was actually good. I know it looks scary, just 1 mana and casting stuff for free, but previous cards just don't tend to work out that well in practice. If you do want to build around it, the easiest way to power it up, and this is probably more of a commander thing, is to just draw cards during your opponent's turn, especially multiple cards. Like, if you can play this and then Brainstorm to draw 3 cards, you get 2 counters on it. Then during your opponent's turn, Quick Study to draw 2 cards. You're up to 4 counters on it. Then you Blue Suns on it to draw a couple cards. You're up to 6 counters on it. You can actually like speed this up significantly. And in that world, if you can start dropping like 8 drops into play for free after 1 or 2 turn cycles, then this card is absolutely super scary. But I don't know how realistic that is in practice. So Lady Octopus, it's a cool design. It calls back to Ether Vial. It can be really powerful if it sticks on the battlefield. It just seems like it's probably going to be a little bit too clunky to actually be competitive. Next up, we got a very interesting new rare land in Oscorp Industries. So this is a land that makes Grixis mana, so blue, black, and red. It enters tapped. If it enters from your graveyard, you lose 2 life, and then it has Mayhem. So you can play it from your graveyard if you discarded it this turn. Timing rules still apply. So Oscorp Industries, I think this card has potential to be very good in certain decks. So this seems designed to support the Mayhem mechanic, which is all about discarding your own cards for value with Carnage and various green goblins Goblins. In a deck like that, I think this is really good because the power of Oscorp Industries is it's essentially a free discard. If you have like a fear of missing out, let's say, you discard Oscorp Industries, you draw a new card, and then you can just play Oscorp Industries as your land drop for the turn from your graveyard. Yeah, you lose 2 life, it comes into play tapped, whatever, but you essentially got to draw a card for free with fear of missing out. And we have a lot of powerful effects in this standard format that are all about drawing and discarding. Terso Lightshedder, Kiora, Kefka. So if you're playing those kind of cards, I think this is really good. It makes 3 colors of mana, it synergizes super well with your self-discard stuff, so it's not a card for most decks, but in those discard decks, like the Mayhem deck or various Fear of Missing Out Kefka style decks, I think this could be a staple level land. In Commander, it reminds me a little bit of Drownyard Temple. Drownyard Temple was a land that you could put into play from your graveyard for 3 mana. Oscorp Industries has the upside that you can play it for free, but it has a timing restriction that you have to play at the turn that you discarded it. Drownyard Temple, you could just mill over and leave in your graveyard and get back whenever you want to. But Drownyard Temple, in some decks, can be a pretty powerful source of ramp. Oscorp Industries isn't technically ramp because it still takes your land drop for the turn, so it's not an extra land hitting the battlefield. I think the biggest challenge for this card in Commander is really just color identity. The best decks for it, like Madness decks, are usually in Rakdos, so you can't really play it because it's got blue mana in it. So I think that's the biggest problem, but it's really good in like Kefka. If you are a Grixis or a 4 or 5 color deck that's about discarding your own cards, I think you play this pretty much every single time. The other question for this card is it part of a cycle? And my guess is the answer is no. I think that Wizards made this as a standalone card just to support the Mayhem deck in the Mayhem colors, but I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe there's, a whole cycle of these, but my guess is this is just a one-off, but it still seems very good in the right deck. We also got the Spot Living Portal, so a 5 mana Orzhov 4/4 legendary human scientist villain. It says when it enters, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent and up to 1 target non-land permanent card from a graveyard, and then when it dies, put on the bottom of its owner's library, and if you do, return the exiled cards to their owner's hand. So the Spot, it's kind of like a weird Angel of Sanctions and Angel of Serenity. At a base level, it's 5 mana. I exile your best thing, and I exile something from the graveyard. The exiling from the graveyard is actually kind of interesting. So on one hand, you can just use it as graveyard hate, get rid of something that might, reanimate or come into play from the graveyard. You can also use it to soften the blow of your opponent killing this Spot. So if you play the Spot in exile, your opponent's best thing from the battlefield, but your best thing from the graveyard, well then if your opponent kills Spot, at least you're getting something powerful back from the graveyard when it dies. So I think that's one of the ways you can play the card. That's where the Angel of Serenity comparison comes in. If you remember Angel of Serenity from forever ago, the way this card was played, yes, sometimes you snipe some of your opponent's creatures with it, but a lot of times you were using this to exile your own stuff, so you could kind of create this value loop of keep getting Thragtusk back and replaying them and so forth. The big upside of Spot is it hits any non-land permanent, and that's really powerful in our current standard. If you think about our current standard, you got to be able to deal with artifacts like Agatha's Soul Cauldron, creatures like Vivi, enchantments like Prop's Eidetic Memory, even Planeswalkers, and this is one card that gets rid of all of them. The biggest challenge for the card is it is 5 mana, so is it going to be fast enough, or is it just too slow? That's my big concern, is it might just be too much mana. It seems really good in Ketramos. That was my first thought, is it works so well with Ketramos. You play Ketramos, you play this, you exile stuff, you draw cards with Ketramos, and the other thing that Spot does really well is it plays really well with blink effects and bounce effects, because the way it's worded, the cards only come back when it dies, but if it leaves the battlefield in another way, like let's say you Parting Gust it to blink it, then those cards go away forever. So in a blink style deck, the Spot becomes even better. You can play the Spot, get rid of your opponent's best thing, and then ephemerate it, and it's gone forever, and then it comes back into play, and you get rid of something else, and then blink it again to do it again. So I think that's part of the card's power. The other part, as I mentioned before, is just using this on your own stuff to get it back from the graveyard. That's not the primary mode of this card, but that is something that is going to come up on occasion, where you play this, get rid of one of your opponent's things, get rid of one of your own things, and get it back when Spot dies. So the Spot, I think the card could be playable in Standard. The one thing that gives me a catch is just being 5 mana might make it kind of slow, but the card seems like it's really powerful. It works well with Ketramos, it works well with blink effects, and just having a card that can exile anything, even temporarily in some cases, is still a powerful effect. We also got a new white land aura in Friendly Neighborhood. So 4 mana for an enchantment that enchants a land. When it enters, you make 3/1/1 green and white human citizen creature tokens, And then Enchanted Land has pay 1 and tap it to give target creature +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So Friendly Neighborhood, I actually think this card could kind of be good. So essentially, you're getting 3 1/1s for 4 mana. So you're paying a 1 mana tax on top of Hop to It, which Hop to It hasn't actually made it as a standard card, but you're paying a little bit of a premium. But that's because you're getting the pumping mode. In the pumping mode, we don't have an exact comparison for this. It kind of reminds me of Basilisk Gate, which has become a really good card in Pauper, just pumping equal the number of gates you control. But if you're in some sort of go wide deck, and you can just flood the board with creatures, being able to pump one of your creatures, especially if it has trample or something, can be very, very scary with this card. It can easily be pay 2, give a creature +5/+5, +10/+10. So I think the combination of those two things make me pretty interested in this card. It's both a payoff and an enabler for that payoff. So where do we play this card? So you could play it in the Caretaker's Talent decks, although I'm not actually sure that's the best home for it. The thing about the Caretaker's Talents deck is they tend to be more control than aggro, and I think that Friendly Neighborhood is going to be at its best in some sort of aggro deck where you can actually take advantage of its pump mode, which I don't think mono white tokens can actually do. Maybe it's a new build of like aggro tokens with Caretaker's Talent, but it does work really well with Caretaker's Talent to draw cards, pump your tokens, Elspeth Stormslayer to double up your tokens, getting 6 1/1s for 4 mana, and then being able to pump at least +6/+6. Kind of insane if you got an Elspeth on the battlefield. It might be even better in some sort of like Convoke style deck. So this is an archetype that is kind of faded since rotation, lost some of its key pieces, but if you're playing Imodane's Recruiter, Warden of the Inner Sky, and just trying to flood the board with creatures, this plays right into what your deck wants to do. It's giving you a bunch of bodies, and it's giving you a way to force through even more damage, so I think that could be another home for the deck. As far as Commander is concerned, I think this card can be really good in token decks. If you're trying to go wide in Arabella, Cadria Caller of the Small, Reese the Redeemed, I think this is worth it. Like 4 mana for 3 1/1s is fine. And then the pump mode can actually be legit scary in a token deck in Commander, where decks can just spiral out of control so quickly, where you can go from 0 to having like 20 creatures on the battlefield, and then being able to just pay 2 and tap this to give +20 to a +20 to something is probably going to be game ending. The other interesting part about this card is it makes humans. So if you're playing a human deck, especially a go wide human deck, Kyler, Catilda, Jarina, I think this is at least in the conversation. The only problem with playing in humans is one of the most supported tribes in all of Magic. There's just so many good humans that it might not make the cut, even though it's good, just because there's so much competition for the slot. But it does fit the theme really well if your deck is trying to put a ton of humans on the battlefield. So Friendly Neighborhood, I think it could have some standard potential and definitely good in token style decks in Commander. We also got a weird pump spell / protection spell / kind of doing something unique that we haven't really seen before spell in Strength of Will. So 2 mana green instant. Until end of turn, it gives target creature indestructible, and it gains whenever this creature is dealt damage, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So just as far as protection, the card's kind of bad, right? Like if you just want to give something indestructible, for 1 mana Defend the Rider, gives a creature hexproof and indestructible. Actually a permanent, not even a creature. It gives any permanent hexproof and indestructible. Reroute Systems gives a creature indestructible for 1 mana. So essentially you're paying a tax on this card. You're paying an extra mana compared to what you could be paying if you just wanted to protect a creature. So why are we paying this extra mana? And the answer is, this is also like a weird pump spell. So imagine you have a creature on the battlefield. Let's just say Bristly Bill, since it's a green creature. You got a Bristly Bill on the battlefield. Your opponent goes to Witchstalker Frenzy it to deal 5 damage to it to kill it. If you respond with Strength of Will, you don't just save your creature like you would with a Defend the Rider or Reroute Systems. You're actually going to get 5 +1/+1 counters on it. So 2 mana put 5 counters on something and save it from removal, that's actually a really good deal. It turns into like this ridiculous pump spell. Another scenario where this works, you got the Bristly Bill or whatever creature, your opponent attacks you with an Overlord in the Hauntwoods. You block with your Bristly Bill, you Strength of Will it, you take 6 damage from the Overlord, you get 6 counters on the Bristly Bill. So this can actually add a ton of power to the battlefield, and that's what makes the card kind of intriguing. Like, just as protection, it's bad. Just as a pump spell, it's inconsistent. But maybe when you add all those things together, like an expensive protection spell with a weird pump spell, maybe it ends up being pretty good. It also lines up pretty well against first strike creatures. The way first strike works is if you have a non-first strike creature, your opponent attacks you with a first strike creature, you strength the will, your opponent's creature is going to damage your creature first to grow it, and then your creature will presumably kill the first strike creature because of its newfound strength of willpower. The card also has some combo potential, which this is probably more, well, I don't know, it could work in Modern. I think it's probably more likely to be a Commander thing. I don't know if the Modern, like, Hardened Scales deck need it, but it goes infinite with Walking Ballista and Hardened Scales. So Hardened Scales, if you put a counter on something, you get that many counters plus one instead. Walking Ballista comes into play with counters. You can remove a counter from it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So the idea is, if you have a Walking Ballista and a Hardened Scales, and you strength of will your Walking Ballista, you can remove a counter from Walking Ballista to ping itself for 1 damage. That'll trigger strength of will to put a counter on it, but since you have Hardened Scales, it'll actually be 2 counters. So essentially, for every 1 counter you remove from Walking Ballista, you get 2 counters back on it. So you get an infinitely big Walking Ballista. Once it's hundreds of power or whatever, you just ping your opponent's face a bunch of times. This is something that could work in like Modern Hardened Scales. I'm just not sure if Hardened Scales wants to play a card like Strength of Will, which outside of this combo in specific is not a card they really want in their deck. So it might just be too inconsistent, but it is worth keeping in mind. Maybe we get a new combo deck out of Strength and Will. In Commander, you just play it as protection, and it works pretty well with like mass damage sweepers like Blasphemous Act. If someone Blasphemous Acts you Strength of Will, you end up with 13 +1/+1 counters on your creatures. So I really like this card. We'll have to wait and see if at 2 mana it's actually cheap enough to see competitive play, but this card can, in the right situation, add a ton of power to the battlefield and let you save your thing from a removal spell. We also got a new Mayhem equipment, in rocket-powered Goblin Glider. So this is a 3-mana equipment that equips for 2 and also Mayhems for 2. It says, when this equipment enters, if it was cast from your graveyard, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has flying and haste. And I think this card is actually pretty simple. So as far as comparisons, we don't have a great one. It's kind of like a very upgraded Fleet Feather Sandals. But I think the story of this card is, if you have to cast it from your hand for 3 mana and then equip it for 2 mana, the card's pretty bad. No one's going to play it. On the other hand, if you can cast it for just 2 mana from your graveyard with Mayhem, and then you equip it for free, then this card kind of becomes legitimately great. Like, 2 mana to give something +2/+0 flying and haste, and have that effect be permanent for as long as it stays on the battlefield, is actually a very, very good card. So if you just want to give something haste, we got cards like Lava Spur Boots. There's just better ways to do this if you have to pay full price for rocket-powered Goblin Glider. But if you can Mayhem it, the card becomes so powerful. It can even work with Vivi, and I'm not saying that the tier Vivi decks are going to play this card, but it does work really well with Vivi. So imagine this. You got a Vivi out, you fear missing out, you discard the rocket-powered Goblin Glider, you play it for 2 mana, you put it on Vivi. When you cast it, it triggers Vivi, so it gets a counter to let it make more mana, and then it's going to give +2/+0 flying and haste, so it's 2 more power. Essentially, in that scenario, rocket-powered Goblin Glider is literally free. It's actually generating mana because you get the cast trigger too, but it's actually making back more mana than you spent on it with Vivi. So again, I just don't know if the Vivi deck needs this synergy, but it would work in that deck. Worst case, if you don't have Vivi, you can, I don't know, discard it FOMO and put it on a Steam Core Smaller and just smash for a ton of damage in the air. The other place this card seems really good is in just dedicated Mayhem decks like Carnage and Green Goblin, Ultimate Green Goblin. These decks, you're going to be able to discard it consistently because that's kind of your entire gimmick. And then imagine just like having an Ultimate Green Goblin. On your upkeep, you discard your rocket-powered Goblin Glider, and then you put the rocket-powered Goblin Glider on your Ultimate Green Goblin. All of a sudden, you have this 7-power hasty flyer that's just hitting for so much damage. It's also kind of absurd with Kefka, like being able to put this on a Kefka, play your Kefka, discard it to Kefka, so you get 1 Kefka trigger, and then putting this on Kefka so you can immediately attack with Kefka and get another Kefka trigger is absolutely kind of wild. So I think in the right deck, I actually really like this card. As far as Commander is concerned, the story is basically the same. If you're paying this full price, there's just better ways to do essentially the same thing. But if you can get it in the graveyard with the stuff we were talking about before, like Kefka or maybe Chain or Olivia or the infamous Cruel Claw, then I think this is actually very powerful equipment. We also got some more cards from this special sheet, which of course have super sweet Spider-Man art. Most of them are just kind of fine reprints. I think the most interesting is Opposition Agent, just because we've never had an Opposition Agent on Arena before. So this means now you're going to have to watch out as you tutor in formats like Brawl and in Timeless once Spider-Man drops. An Opposition Agent might actually be pretty good in a format like Timeless. With Dark Ritual, you can actually get it into play on turn 1, stop all your opponent's fetch lands. So definitely going to be brewing around that once the set actually drops. We also got a bunch of lower rarity cards, so a few worth shouting out. One is Rhino's Rampage, so a Gruul hybrid 1-mana sorcery that says target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It fights target creature an opponent controls. When excess damage is dealt to the creature an opponent controls this way, destroy up to 1 target non-creature artifact with mana value 3 or less. So a lot of words on this card, but essentially 1-mana sorcery speed fight, but 1-mana sorcery speed fight that can also blow up an Agatha Soul Cauldron, or a Simulacrum Synthesizer, or a Ghost Vacuum. So I think that's worth keeping in mind in some sort of like big green or red stompy deck. Maybe this is a sideboard removal spell that has a little flexibility since it can also get rid of an artifact. Goes up in value even more probably in Best of 1 where you don't have a sideboard, so this is kind of a 2-for-1 where you get the baseline fight effect, but then you also get a little bit of artifact removal in your deck as well. We also got Heroes Hangout, a 1-mana red sorcery. This is choose one, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them until your next turn you can play that card, or 1 or 2 target creatures each get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn. So Heroes Hangout kind of reminds me of Opera Love Song. Obviously 1 less mana, but it's kind of the same setup. Either you impulse draw or you get to pump your creatures. It does both of those things worse. Like Opera Love Song, you impulse draw 2. Heroes Hangout, you only get to play 1 of the 2. Opera Love Song gives +2/+0. Heroes Hangout gives +1/+0. But still, we've seen Opera Love Song see play just because in red aggro decks, the combination of being able to pump your stuff and also draw some extra cards is a pretty powerful effect. So I think that Heroes Hangout, at 1 mana, it's worth keeping in mind at least. I mean, it's a 1-mana red cantrip. That alone in some sort of prowess deck might be enough to let it see play. So I don't think it's busted or anything, but it could be a potentially playable card. We also got the only card that actually matters to me from this set, which is Bagel and Schmear. So Bagel and Schmear, it's a 1-mana food artifact. You can share it by paying a white mana and tapping and sacrificing it to put a +1/+1 counter up to 1 target creature and draw a card only as a sorcery. Or you can nosh it for 2 mana, sacrifice the artifact, you gain 3 life and draw a card. And I hear you wondering, Seth, don't you hate this card? Don't you hate cards that are just modern foods and people eating those foods in their everyday life like Graham O'Brien? And the answer is, I used to. I used to absolutely hate cards like Instant Ramen and Graham O'Brien and Hot Dog Cart and Bagel and Schmear. But now I've decided I am just going to embrace the absurdity of all this. And rather than complaining about how silly these cards are, I'm just going to build a commander deck around Graham O'Brien and all these modern foods. And it is going to be hilarious. So now I found myself actively rooting for these cards. Not because I think they are wonderful Magic cards or super flavorful. I think they're kind of cringy still. But I am just going to embrace the cringe and try to turn it into the most epic commander deck of all time. So now I'm actually super excited for Bagel and Schmear because that is one more card for the Graham O'Brien deck. We also got Vibrant Cityscape, which is a land that you can tap and sack to search your library for a basic land, put it in play tapped and shuffle. If that sounds similar to Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, that because it is literally the exact same thing, except you get a Vibrant Cityscape instead of an Evolving Wilds or a Terramorphic Expanse. So if you want a Cityscape version of these cards, you can play it in your deck. It's going to be super cheap. We also got Gallant Citizen, which might make my Graham O'Brien deck because it's just an astronaut standing there waving at the crowd with a somewhat suggestively shaped rocket in the background, but the card probably playable. It's 2 hybrid Selesnya mana for a 1/1 that when it enters you draw a card. If that sounds familiar, it's literally Pawn Prophet or Helpful Hunter, and these cards I've seen play in the past. 2 drops at ETB, draw a card, tend to see play. The double mana symbols can even be an upside in some cases with stuff like Devotion, so not a broken card or anything, but a card that definitely could see constructed play. We also got a couple of cards potentially for the Mayhem deck in Pumpkin Bombardment and Scarlet Spider Cane. So Pumpkin Bombardment, a Rakdos hybrid for a sorcery that has an additional cost of discard a card or pay 2 to deal 3 damage to target creature. So a removal spell that is not great unless you intentionally want to discard a card. If you get an upside out of discarding a card, like for example, you can Mayhem that card into play, then this is a fine early game removal spell that's supporting the synergy of your deck. Scarlet Spider Cane, 2 mana Rakdos, 2/1 legendary spider human hero with menace. It says when it enters, you may discard a card. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can mayhem it for a single mana. So this is a card that works really well with mayhem, right? If you discard a card, you can then mayhem that card into play, and you get a 3/2 menace for 2, which isn't bad. Or it's only 1 mana to mayhem into play, so if you discard it to the pumpkin bombardment or whatever, you can get it into play on the cheap. So I think that Scarlet Spider Cane, not like busted or anything, but these could be kind of the filler cards that make the mayhem archetype actually work in standard. We also got a bunch of draft chaff that you can check out over at mtgpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Spider-Man spoilers for today. So what do you think of these cards? What do you think of the set? What other card should I add to that Graham O'Brien deck? That's my project for this week, is filling out that deck, because I cannot wait to play with a tasty bagel and schmear after I finish my instant ramen with Graham O'Brien. What card should I add to that deck? Let me know about that too. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Spider-Man spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the deck that I built to try to beat Is It Cauldron in Standard.